First of all, thanks again to all the students that came out and helped with the open house yesterday. Really appreciate your time and answering all the questions of people that came by. Anyway, just moving on. One of the things that was asked yesterday, a team was working on a bit of an issue they were having. They wanted to produce a view for their project work where basically they had a many-to-many relationship. So I'm shown here like A, B, C. So uh, entity A and C are in a many-to-many with B being the intersection table between. No big deal. Done that kind of thing many times before, but the focus was they were going to be ordering by A, but also they needed within each grouping, so to speak, of A, they wanted to order by a property of C. And it was a little tricky getting a LINQ query that would do that. That would allow filtering or ordering across a many-to-many this way. So I'm going to do a little example here, just putting it together using the medical office. Again, I apologize that it isn't a richer example, but it's close enough to give you the general idea. So in my situation, what we're looking at then is I've got patient, appointment, and condition, right? I already had that already. So that's what I'm going to do. And at the same time, we're even going to throw an order by in each, right? So order by patients, then by appointments and condition. Actually, in order, the last one would be by appointment. So it'll be the first order by is this one. The second is going to be this one. And the third is this one. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at doing. So coming over here, I had to make a couple changes. First of all, I thought, well, ordering by the complaint name is not very exciting. They were working with dates, so I wanted to do an example of that, and I'm lazy. So what I did is I just changed this model slightly. I inherited from auditable. Why? That gives me a date automatically, an updated on date. So I just did a migration, updated the database, and I cheated a little. I went into the table and changed the last updated date manually with some update queries so that each of the 3 or 4 records, I know there's only a few, would have a slightly different date. Okay, so that was the first thing I had to do. Then, for the view that they wanted to produce, I suggested yesterday that they use a view model of some sort. So, pulling information from those 3 entities, I called it my fancy list, right? Because we're doing a little fancy list here. So, a fancy list view model uh, basically took 3 things from the patient model and actually copied and pasted them right out of the patient model, including the full name. Okay. And that way I get our standard names for the patient. By the way, I also eventually added an ID and I marked it as key because being that this is a view model and I actually wanted to do some scaffolding on it, I had to specify what field was the key. It doesn't use, because the entity framework never touches this one. Okay, and then from the appointment itself, I threw in the appointment date, right? So we could, and the notes. So those 2 things come from the appointment, that intersection table. And then finally, the complaint name and my updated on field. Notice, remember, I had to make it a nullable date time because that's how our audible data is set up, come from the actual complaint table. So I have data coming from all 3 tables into a single view model. Okay, so let's talk about the query next. Okay, let's talk about the issues with the query then. So, we're going to select, we're focusing on patients. That was our A in our ABC scenario, right? And of course, our first thought might be that we want to, do something like include the appointments and then carry on, right? So, well, how do you carry on to also include uh, the, sorry, uh, conditions, right? Well, you might think, well, gosh, can I keep on going and maybe do a dot include on this include and get over to the appointments and so on? It doesn't work, right? No, that's not going to work at all. So you might think, well, maybe I could do something like this, right? Instead, go from here. We'll take that out and uh, just do a dot include as well, where we go to appointments and then dot complaints. Well, it's not in there, right? So you just can't do it that way. You can't just do a dot include to cross over all of these things, right? So let's just take all this out here for a second and we'll talk about what we really want to do. Another dot include is a short form, but dot include is limited. Really, If you check the documentation for the entity framework, the team is very open about the fact that .include is really just a way to pass the parameter, pass the name of the collection or object inside the one model that you are including. But you can't do a order by, you can't do a whereby or any other operations on the .include itself. However, it is LINQ and it's based on queries. So what we can do is actually do a join. So we can say from P in patients, join A in appointments, right? On, just like we do with joins, on the P, the patient, dot ID equals. Now that might throw you a little bit. We can't just go our equal sign. We have to say equals in a LINQ query written in query expression syntax, equals A dot patient ID. And that gets the join. So that's a pretty good way. Now we could keep on joining as well to get over to patients, but guess what we can do at this stage? Oh, I gotta get focus over here. Once you're within a single navigation property, then we're welcome to use our include, right? So we're going to join patients to appointments on the primary foreign key relationship, but each appointment we can now include its lookup value, its complaint, right? And that gives us the ability to transverse all three entities, and actually, in an extremely powerful way, we can do whatever we want with any information from all three entities now that we have it put together this way. So for example, if you want to do a where clause, okay, so you can actually go right over to the complaint and put something like that, the length of the complaint name has regraded for. I took that out here in my comment because it didn't make much sense. I was just trying to show that you can actually do where clauses on anything from a complaint, from an appointment, from a patient, right? Because they're all available now in our from clause, okay? But we can also do order by. So here I'm ordering by the patient first and last name and then first, right? And then I'm going to order by the complaint, okay? So A, with the include, we have to go A dot complaint dot, and then here's our updated on. So if you remember our model back in Word, what we said is the second thing to order by is something out of our condition, right? So that's exactly what we're doing here, or complaint. Sorry, I guess I used the wrong word in my Word document. Complaint condition, you know what I mean. Okay, so this is then, after the patient information, it will sort by the updated on date. The point is, I mean, why would you ever do that in the real world? But I'm just illustrating the fact that you can pick a property of the uh, table C, the one right across the many to many, and order on it. And finally, we'll order on the third one, the middle one here, right, in the appointment itself. Sorry, that's supposed to say complaint. All right, you get the idea. Okay, so that gives us the ability. And then what are we going to do with this data though? Well, a query like this, you're pretty much always going to write this and either then select given piece of information from each and every one of our entities and put it into something new. It could be an anonymous object, but most likely we're going to actually create a view model, right? So what I can do is I can select whatever I want from all this rich collection of information from all three entities into a new, I'm going to call it my fancy list, right? My fancy list view model. So you see that I'm getting certain information from the patient, the ID, first name, middle, and last name, and then a couple things from the appointment, right? And then our complaint name and our updated on coming from the complaint table itself. So we're putting the information that we do want to display together into a view model. Okay. Now to make that view model object, right? We talked about this already. I just pulled information from the various uh, models and put it together here. Notice I've taken out most of the annotations. The main things I left were things like display names or stuff that affects the formatting of how the information appears on the page. But this is really a model, view model just for display only. So the other aspects I don't really need. I'm not going to do validation or update or anything here. But that brings me to the next interesting point. Okay, so we modified this, we have that, we have this in our controller. Oh, before I leave the controller code, notice that this is really nice. Let me focus on that. See how that says iQueryable? So at this stage, this query is still, it's in that state where we can modify it, right? As an iQueryable, we can continue to query. So just want to point out down here, you can add additional where clauses. This is that same technique that we taught to write when you're first creating a page that has maybe sorting and filtering. right? That you can take your initial collection of data and further modify it. This would probably be in an if or something like that. If there was an option set on a view to filter for some where clause or something, right? You can. I just want to put this in here to show the fact that we can continue to modify, add new where clauses, add new order by clauses, even though this is already ordered in a given way, right? And it will actually override that, and then we can to-list it just as we pass it to the view. Neat, eh? Very powerful approach, and gives us an easy way to get across multiple joined related entities. Now, the last thing, of course, is a view to actually display this, and we could just do it from scratch. But I'm just going to share you a tip and a trick. Okay, with a view model like we're using here, our fancy Whiz view model, you can actually have the scaffolding generate a view to go along with it, right? So again, we're inside our patient's controller. I've just added this new action result, okay, that when we get it, we're going to return a view, right? So if I make a view called fancy list, then when I say return view, it will use it. How do we create that view? Well, we can have much of the grunt work done for us in the same way we have in the past. If I right click and say add view on this action, okay, view name fancy list, it got that from where I clicked. And if I say something that uses data like a list, which is probably what we want here, I can specify the model class as my fancy list view model, right? The only trick here, so that's the tip. The trick is I can't say no data context, right? It's going to be, oh, maybe I can. Well, if you forget to, right, and you have a data context, here's the little trap that you should be aware of. What it will do is it will actually go and add a DB set for this view model in your context. And then you'll get that silly error that comes up all the time about, oh, your database is out of sync with your model and, use migrations to update database and so on and so forth. And I'll just show you where that happens. Okay, do I want to replace it? No, I don't actually. So let me change, because I've already got it and I made a few changes. So I'll just call it Fancy List 2. Okay, all right. Well, anyway, it does work. Uh, I'm just going to skip over that for now. Let's just go look at the view. I was only going to show you that trap, and clearly I've found a different way to avoid that trap anyway. So let's go to the actual view. So under patients, here's my fancy list. So you could do it from scratch as well, but notice that the model is our view model, fancy list VM. And what I've done is I've just decided to show the full name, right? Because remember, in our view model, we did add the summary property for full name and our notes and our appointment date and complaint and so on, right? So that's pretty much straightforward. But what I did as well is the primary key, okay, is a good way to indicate each actual patient. Because remember, I pulled that from the actual patient entity itself. So by setting a last ID equal to 0 before we start looping, it allows me to do a little trick here. Okay, if the last ID doesn't equal the current item's ID, then we need to display the name, right? Because it's a different name from before. And then at the same time, after we display the full name of the patient, I'll just update my last ID to the current patient's ID. And then as we come to the next one, it just will skip over and won't show the name, right? So this is the effect we get. Oh, it's opening on the other screen. Sorry. Let me pull it over here, right? There you go. So it's kind of like a grouping, right? Because it doesn't, the name would be repeated over and over again, but since I'm sorting first by the patient, okay, I know all the same patient IDs will be together. So if it's the same ID as last time, then I just won't show the name. But the next point is look at how the ordering is. So you see successfully, it is in order by this last date, which is coming from our table C, our complaint at the far side of the many-to-many, right? So, and within values that have the same date here, it is in order by the actual appointment date, right? So maybe better labels would have made it clearer that this is from our updated on in the complaint, and this is just the appointment's date itself. But down here where we have Wilma, right? Notice there's all four, okay, of the dates here coming from the table C are the same. So you can clearly see that it's in chronological order, going from oldest to newest right here for the appointment date. So our three-level sorting is definitely working. We're sorting first by patient, then by this date column coming from the far table across the many-to-many, and then this date column coming from the intersection table in the middle. All right, so hopefully you'll find that fairly useful. Again, probably it was the trickiness of writing the LINQ query that is the biggest fun thing to overcome here. Okay. Oops, almost forgot I wanted to deal with that error I was getting. So it turns out I just had to do a build. Remember how many times have I said it and I forgot myself? Always do a build before you're going to do any scaffolding. Okay, so nice trick then I figured out only by accident just now making this video. If when you go add new view, right, if I have to give it a different name, fancy list 1, 2, whatever, right? If I want a list and I want to use my fancy list view model, all I have to do is delete the data context class. That way you don't have it create this uh, extra DB set, which you really don't want because you're never going to try to update anything through this actual view model, right? So that avoids it being created inside your DB context. Then I can just add, and it does the easy work for me here that, okay, fancy list 1, right? But it is set up on the right view model. And it, of course, it takes all the properties in the view model and scaffolds them in the normal way. But that's how I created my version. And then, of course, I modified it, right, uh, appropriately as I needed or wanted to. So you notice I'm just using the certain fields that I desired to show, right? Using the full name, getting rid of the separate first, middle, last is basically the big thing, and adding my little trick here to skip over the ones I don't want to see. So that's it. Hopefully you find that helpful.